The New York Jets are a complete disaster, and they must make changes. We're going to talk about that coming up next. So I think the most optimistic Jet fan can realize that the season ended yesterday versus the Atlanta Falcons in that crummy day in the Meadowlands. Just the weather. And this is where this video is going to make an impact, I think, for Jets fans in regards to like this fan base has stuck with this team through passion. I mean, just watching Aaron Rodgers come out with the American flag on opening night and the fact that that crowd was so ready for a different season, a different feeling. Same old Jets is gone. No, we got Aaron Rodgers on our team now. And even after Aaron Rodgers gets injured, there's still hope to just have a playoff season. Just get back into the playoffs. The division, the Bills look weird, okay? The Dolphins, they kind of just beat bad teams, you know? We all knew the Dolphins. But the Patriots have been a disaster this year. Maybe we can do something, maybe. And then maybe if Rodgers, you know, after they're 4-3, Rodgers, don't rule me out coming out in December. Don't rule it out for me. Well, 4-8. And what did I say last week? Aaron Rodgers is not going to come back at 4-8. He even said it doesn't make sense. Team is 4-8. And news dropped today. Like I said last week to Jets fans, do not expect better from the Jets after benching Zach Wilson. Because I guarantee you Robert Saleh was playing him for a reason. He was playing him because Tim Boyle and Trevor Siemian are not better options than Zach Wilson. But Wilson needed to be benched to hold him accountable. He has had so many chances with this Jet team in 3 years. So many chances to prove a point, prove that he can play in the NFL. And sure, he's had a moment or two, but Zach Wilson has been bad. Terrible. Terrible draft pick by Joe Douglas. We'll get to him in a minute. But you can't rip Robert Saleh for all of a sudden going to Trevor Siemian and Tim Boyle. It didn't work out. So now they're thinking, let's go back to Zach Wilson. And what is the report? I don't know if it's official, if Zach Wilson said this, but a report came out from The Athletic. I'm forgetting the reporter's name. I apologize. But Zach Wilson is now hesitant to come back and start for the New York Jets. What are you doing, Zach? Listen, we get it. We get it. You feel disrespected by the organization. You feel disrespected that they felt you were the problem, and of course the offense gets worse and blah, blah, blah. This is Joe Douglas. I'm sorry. No quarterback on this roster is good. No quarterback. That doesn't mean Zach Wilson should feel entitled like, oh, I'm not coming back. I'll sign somewhere else. Cut me this week. Now, I don't know if this is true, 100%, but the Athletic's pretty reliable. I don't understand why Zach Wilson wouldn't go back. His career might be over. Why should you get a spot in the NFL if you feel like, oh, I refuse to play? What, because your feelings are hurt? I'm sorry, man. You were not playing good football. This is terrible. This is a terrible look. I don't care what anybody says. I don't care if you feel like the Jets were unfair or that they listened to the fan base. No. It was time to bench Zach Wilson. Prove a point. Hold him accountable. That doesn't mean you necessarily bench him for the season, but you had to show, hey, you're not playing well. We're going with another option. And if they don't play well, we'll go back to you, but we're only going to go back to you because they're not playing well, not because of whatever reason, because we feel you're better than them, because we don't at the moment. You need to sit. And now he's like, oh, no, now you want me back? I don't know if this is 100% true. I'm just saying if it is, that is disgraceful from Zach Wilson. Who are you after basically being a huge reason why this Jets team cannot succeed? Because let's face it, people are like, oh, put any quarterback behind that offensive line and Nate Hackett. No. Aaron Rodgers on this team at 40 years old, 39 years old, 40 years old. This team is minimum 8-4. Minimum. They beat the Falcons. They beat the Chargers. They beat the Raiders. They beat the Patriots. They compete in some of these games. Kansas City, they probably win that game. So don't give me this. Don't give me this. It's like, oh, any quarterback. No, their quarterback situation sucks. The only one that's probably worse is New England. Crazy. So now what happens? Heads have to roll, man. Heads have to roll. If you're Robert Saleh, I get it. He's had Zach Wilson his entire career there with the Jets. They ended last year on a 6-game losing streak. He let that whole Mike White thing get into the storylines and kind of mess up a little bit of a chemistry and had the team turn on Zach Wilson in the first place. That's on him. I'm not saying that, Zach Wilson was playing good. He wasn't. But you can't let that happen. You can't let your players feel that way. And he said, oh, it was taken out of context. They were just trying to show support. No, you have to understand that that alienates him. You got to understand that. And I know they've done a pretty good job. They've been babying Zach Wilson. I get it. And I am on the Jets side in regards to Zach Wilson's got to come back and play football. And for him to feel entitled in that way and have this ego, like, I don't want to come back. Ridiculous. You may not have an NFL job. Feeling like the Jets are the reason you're screwed up completely. I'm not saying they don't have a hand in it, but you got to play better football, man. You got to play better football. You don't go from superstar to garbage. So it's not like Zach Wilson's going to go somewhere else. He's going to be a complete superstar, at least next year. Maybe 6 years from now, he'll be Geno Smith. Come on now. But from the Jets' point of view, they have been an absolute disaster in hiring coaches, I believe. I don't think Robert Saleh is a great coach. You have, at least offensively, they have been abysmal. Defensively, I'm not saying he doesn't have a hand, but my God, penalty. So undisciplined. So and that's a coaching thing. What do you think he's saying in practice? Guys, about the penalty issues. What do you think he's saying? Because whatever is happening, it's not working. It's just not. So, penalties, undisciplined. Okay? The defense is good. We get it. But my God, just some of these penalties on both offensive defense are just crazy. They'll get a good play and then offensive penalty. Okay? This is all, and then Nate Hackett's play calling combined with Tim Boyle, Trevor Siemian being bad yesterday, and Zach Wilson's incompetence. It's a complete mess. And yeah, the offensive line is bad, but you can't imagine that a better quarterback. I mean, you can't tell me that a better quarterback there doesn't make this team better. Whether it was Josh Dobbs, whether it was Mike White, whoever, any backup, veteran backup. That boils down to Joe Douglas. Now, I think Joe Douglas is going to keep his job, but there's no question to me that he is the biggest reason why the Jets are where they are. I can somewhat see the vision and somewhat defend him. Somewhat. With Zach Wilson being the backup quarterback this year. And his vision of saying Rodgers, he's going to take a year or two to learn into Rodgers. Understand. Somewhat understand that. But you could have had Mike White be it. No. You should have just probably cut ties with Zach Wilson in general. Or at least keep him as the third guy. Just get a veteran in there. That's not what they did. And they assumed Rodgers was going to play most of the year as expected. That's how you should plan. But you got to have some backup plan. Rodgers goes down. They do not sign a veteran quarterback right away. They don't do anything. They don't get Carson Wentz. They don't do any of that. They're like, let's see how Zach Wilson plays. And the next few weeks, the Jets were winning games. They were 4-3 coming out of the Giants game, but you should still, even at 4-3 there, or 3-3, but I believe 4-3, that was right before the trade deadline, so they could have done something about it. Even after that lucky win versus the Giants, because let's face it, I think Jets fans can admit, if the Giants just made a few, maybe one smarter position, kick a field goal, whatever, made it, they don't win that game. But they did. Credit to them. Eagles game, crazy interception, very poor pass from Jalen Hurts, which was very unlikely. Bills game at the beginning of the season. Forces overtime, win on the kick return. The punt return. So their wins, really the one win that they convincingly had of like, oh, that could have gone that either way, or that wasn't the case, was Denver. Is they Won that convincingly at Denver. And now look at Denver, which was interesting. But watching New England, and I know he played well versus Kansas City, but still, they lost. These other games, how do you not see Josh Dobbs in Arizona? Just be like, Zach Wilson really hasn't done much. I know we got a weak schedule, but why don't I just throw a 7th rounder, 6th rounder, whatever, get Josh Dobbs in here. Just in case Zach Wilson pulls a Zach Wilson. I mean, he did it last year. The Jets got a good start last year. And yeah, Zach Wilson wasn't even good, yet they still were 7-4. And then he did the whole second half of the year thing, and they lost 6 straight, and he was benched multiple times. So you would think Joe Douglas would see that and remember that and think, okay, this year, clearly our strength is defense. Clearly our biggest weakness is offense, and that mainly comes from the offensive line. I'm talking about player-wise. The offensive line. And, I know they were looking for another target. That could have been something too. But it's number one, clearly, the quarterback. Zach Wilson hasn't blown anybody away. He's done just enough. But I'm not going to rely on the 40-year-old coming back from a torn Achilles in 3 months, hoping that we're somehow in it. I'm going to go get Josh Dobbs. It's cost me nothing anyway. Just get him in here. Then I can at least say, hey, I gave it my best for this season to try and compete. No, that's not what Joe Douglas did. And now the Jets are a complete crumbling disaster. They're 4-8. They're one of the worst teams in the league. They've lost 5 straight. They ended last year losing 6 straight. Would it shock you if they lost every game for the rest of the season? Maybe they beat New England. Maybe they beat the Washington Commanders. Who knows? You had reports of defensive players feeling resigned, like just not like into it anymore. They're like, is what it is. The quarterback stinks. We recognize all quarterbacks on this team stink. That is Joe Douglas's fault. And I know Aaron Rodgers got hurt, but how do you not have a backup plan? And you've had all this time to analyze the situation. We all knew Zach Wilson couldn't start the whole year. Even after the days where he was doing all right. He was doing okay. We knew. As people who watch the NFL, we knew. And yet Joe Douglas is like, we're good. I like this kid out of BYU. I drafted him. I'm going to keep him. We believe he could be good. You're wrong. So Joe Douglas is the main reason. But Robert Saleh, I can't see how he returns with this crumbling year. Now, if they missed the playoffs, but were competing, and let's say they finished with around 7 wins again, like last year, or 6 wins would have been much for me too, but 7, 8 wins, just missed the playoffs, fine, whatever. Robert Saleh keeping his job, I think some Jet fans would have an issue with, but I think it was going to happen. They're 4-8, lost 5 in a row, season going downhill again after last year, not able to keep the team afloat. You're looking at his overall record. How does Robert Saleh stay? Someone please explain to me. How does Robert Saleh stay? How does he survive that? Rodgers? I mean, last week you saw Rodgers say, hey, I can't control. I think we have a good nucleus, but that's not my position. That's not my job to make that decision. How does Robert Saleh stay? I know it's not all his fault, but how does it happen? It's like unheard of. And your hope is like, oh, Rodgers will come back. Rodgers is a Hall of Famer. He's incredible. We all know about Aaron Rodgers. But he's 40. You're hoping you get a good season out of him next year. Now, I believe a good Aaron Rodgers changes a lot about this team, but they still have issues. They still have issues with that offensive line. I'm not convinced of the head coach. I'm not convinced of the offensive coordinator. I'm not convinced that they can stay disciplined under Robert Saleh in general. Not convinced of any of this stuff. Not convinced of their targets. Maybe Aaron Rodgers fixes all of it. That's a lot to ask for a 40-year-old quarterback. You have to address. They have to draft a quarterback. They have to draft a quarterback for the future. They have to touch up on this offensive line. These are all things that Joe Douglas needs to do. And are you really confident, Jet fans, that Joe Douglas is going to select the right quarterback? Because I'm not. Heads need to roll.